They thought Emely Connor was just another struggling single mother fighting to save her family ranch in Shadow Creek, Arizona. When the Sinaloa Norte cartel started forcing local ranchers to sell their properties, they saw her isolated 350-acre homestead as an easy mark. What they didn't realize was one critical detail. Before becoming a rancher and mother, Emely had spent 12 years as one of the Army's most lethal Special Forces operators, conducting high-stakes missions across Afghanistan and Iraq. Today, the cartel's attempt to intimidate a seemingly vulnerable woman will ignite a chain of events that will expose decades of corruption, dismantle a ruthless criminal operation, and prove that true strength often lies behind the most unassuming facade. This isn't just a story about standing up to intimidation. It's about how underestimating one woman will bring an entire cartel to its knees. Dawn painted the desert sky in shades of amber and gold as Emely Connor stood on her weathered porch, scanning the rugged terrain of her Arizona ranch. A steaming cup of black coffee, old military habits die hard, warmed her calloused hands as she watched her 14-year-old daughter Emma lead her favorite horse, Thunder, across the morning-frosted paddock. The 350 acres of Shadow Creek Ranch stretched out before them, a mix of rocky terrain and fertile grazing land that her late husband James had fallen in love with 10 years ago. At 42, Emely carried herself with the disciplined posture that a decade of Special Forces training had ingrained. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, her sun-weathered face free of makeup, and her work-worn clothes chosen for function rather than style. To any observer, she looked exactly like what most people assumed she was. A hard-working single mother doing her best to keep her family ranch afloat after her husband's passing 2 years ago. But appearances, as Emely had learned during countless covert operations in remote war zones, could be devastatingly deceptive. The distant rumble of Miguel Ortiz's truck approaching the main gate drew her attention. Her ranch foreman of 8 years was early today, unusual for the typically punctual man. Emely's trained eye caught the tension in his shoulders as he parked, the way his head swiveled to check his surroundings before approaching. Combat instincts, dormant but never forgotten, hummed to life. "Mrs. Connor," Miguel called out, his voice carrying a warning tone she recognized from briefings before high-risk missions. "The Martinez spread is selling." Emely set her coffee down, her mind automatically shifting into tactical assessment mode. Carlos Martinez's place? That's the 4th ranch this month, all to the same buyers? Miguel glanced over his shoulder, lowering his voice. He didn't have a choice. 3 men showed up at his house last night. Said it was a generous offer, but they weren't taking no for an answer. Black SUVs, tactical gear poorly hidden under. Expensive suits, they weren't trying to hide what they were. Emely's hand unconsciously brushed the small scar at her collar, a reminder of a close call during a hostage extraction in Kandahar. "Did they mention our property?" "Said it would be convenient if you were willing to sell." Carlos said they knew details, Mrs. Connor, about Emma's school schedule, your financial situation after James passed. They're watching, gathering intel. The familiar cold focus of pre-mission preparation settled over Emely's thoughts. The pattern was clear. She'd seen similar tactics during operations against insurgent forces. Control key terrain, establish presence, gather intelligence on potential resistance. "Where's Daniel today?" she asked, referring to their other ranch hand. "Coming in later. His cousin works dispatch at the sheriff's office. Says there's talk about new business interests in the county. big money flowing in from south of the border. Emely led Miguel to her study, a room that appeared typical of any rancher's office. Accounting books, family photos, James's old Marine Corps flag on the wall. But behind the everyday facade lay carefully maintained security systems and emergency supplies she'd never quite stopped stockpiling. The men who visited Carlos, she said, pulling up satellite maps of the county on her computer, describe them again. Miguel leaned against the doorframe. 5 of them. Leader was tall, maybe early 40s, spoke perfect English but with a Sonoran accent, had a distinctive tattoo on his right forearm, some kind of tribal design around a skull, called himself Diego Ramirez. Emily's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Diego Ramirez, a name she hadn't heard in 7 years. Not since. A classified operation in Helmand province had intercepted a major heroin shipment. The same operation where they discovered links between Taliban drug routes and Mexican cartels. Mrs. Connor, Miguel said quietly, these men, they're not just aggressive buyers, are they? Emely studied the map, noting how the recently sold properties formed a strategic pattern, creating a corridor from the border straight through Shadow Creek County. No, Miguel, they're not. Tell Daniel to be careful what he says to his cousin at dispatch, and let Carlos know. Tell him to take the money and get his family somewhere safe. What about you? They'll come here next. Emely allowed herself a small smile, one that would have been familiar to the operators who'd served under her command. Let them come. This land isn't for sale. After Miguel left to start his daily tasks, Emely opened the gun safe hidden behind James's Marine Corps flag. Inside, past the expected hunting rifles and family protection weapons, lay tools of her former trade, tactical gear, encrypted communications equipment, and a customized Mk-18 CQB rifle she'd maintained with professional precision. The sound of vehicles on the main road drew her attention. Through her office window, she watched 3 black SUVs drive past slowly, their tinted windows concealing their occupants. They were conducting reconnaissance, establishing patterns, looking for weaknesses. Standard cartel procedure. But they were being sloppy about it, overconfident. Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Kate Wilson, the local veterinarian and one of the few people who knew her real background. Strangers asking questions about Shadow Creek Ranch at the feed store, military bearing, poor attempts to look casual. Be careful. Emely sent back a simple acknowledgement, then began her own preparations. The ranch's security systems needed checking. Fields of fire had to be established, and most importantly, she needed to reach out to old contacts. If Sinaloa Norte was moving into Shadow Creek County, they'd follow their usual pattern. Pressure, intimidation, then force. Thought I was done with all this, she murmured, touching the photo of James and Emma on her desk. Her husband had known. What she was when they married had supported her transition from Special Forces operator to rancher and mother. Guess some fights find you whether you're looking for them or not. The morning passed with its usual rhythm of ranch work, but Emily's mind was running multiple scenarios, analyzing angles, identifying potential threats and assets. By noon, she had confirmation from 3 different sources. The cartel was systematically buying or intimidating their way into strategic properties across the county. The local sheriff's office was already compromised, and Border Patrol was looking the other way. It was a textbook operation, one she'd studied and counted dozens of times during her Special Forces career. The difference was, this time, it wasn't just about completing a mission. This time it was about protecting her home, her daughter, her community. "You'd appreciate the irony of this, James," she said to the empty office. Ex-Special Forces operator versus Mexican cartel in rural Arizona. Sounds like one of those action movies you used to love. But this wasn't a movie, and real lives were at stake. Emely knew she had choices to make. She could sell the ranch, disappear into witness protection, let someone else fight this battle. That would be the sensible option. Instead, she began pulling files from her secure server, documents carefully maintained over years of watching and waiting. Sometimes the best weapon wasn't a gun, but information, patience, and the willingness to stand your ground. The cartel was about to learn that they'd picked the wrong ranch, the wrong mother, and the wrong woman to threaten. The SUVs passed by again, slower this time. Emely stood at her window, deliberately visible, playing the role of the unsuspecting target. Let them think she was an easy mark. Let them underestimate her. They'd learn soon enough that they'd made a fatal mistake in threatening not just her ranch, but her daughter's future. The pieces were already falling into place in her mind. Years of Special Forces training combining with a mother's fierce protective instinct to form a plan. The cartel thought they were dealing with a vulnerable single mother. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The black SUVs rolled onto Emely Connor's property at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning. She watched their approach through her kitchen window, noting their positioning. Standard protective formation, driver and passenger in the lead vehicle remaining inside, 3 men emerging from each of the following cars. Their movements betrayed military training, likely ex-Special Forces themselves, turned cartel enforcers. "Emma," she called out to her daughter, who was intentionally busy near the house with Thunder. "Make sure you finish your math homework before riding today." It was their predetermined signal. Emma knew to take the horse to the upper barn where Daniel would be waiting. Documenting everything with a long-range camera Emely had provided. Emely had spent the night setting up surveillance. Points across the property, falling back on years of training she'd never quite forgotten. The terrain of Shadow Creek Ranch provided natural advantages. Elevated positions, clear fields of view, multiple escape routes she'd carefully maintained since buying the property. The man who approached her porch moved with the calculated grace of a predator, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide his combat-ready posture. Emely recognized Diego Ramirez from intelligence briefings years ago, though he'd added a few new scars since their paths had almost crossed in Afghanistan. "Mrs. Connor," he called out, his smile practiced and hollow. "I hope you don't mind us dropping by unannounced. I'm Diego Ramirez, representing Southwest Agricultural Investments." Emely stepped onto her porch, portraying the perfect image of a slightly nervous but dignified single mother. "I wasn't expecting visitors, Mr. Ramirez. My ranch hands mentioned you've been speaking with other property owners in the area." "Ah, yes. We're investing heavily in the region. Your neighbor, Mr. Martinez, was very cooperative. In fact, he suggested we speak with you about your property." The threat was subtle, but clear. Emely caught the slight hand gesture Ramirez made. 2 of his men casually drifting toward the barn, another positioning himself near her truck. "That's very thoughtful of Carlos," Emely replied, her hand resting casually near the small of her back, where her compact SIG P365 was holstered. "But I'm afraid my property isn't for sale." "Mrs. Connor," Ramirez's smile tightened slightly, I don't think you understand the opportunity we're offering. The market is unpredictable. Small ranches like yours, they're vulnerable. Accidents happen. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Sheriff Jake Reynolds's patrol car pulled up, followed by another black SUV. Emely had expected this. Local law enforcement making an appearance to add official pressure. "Everything all right here, Mrs. Connor?" Reynolds called out, his practiced concern betrayed by the way he positioned himself closer to Ramirez than Emely. "Just fine, Sheriff." Mr. Ramirez was leaving. Emily's tone was pleasant but firm. Ramirez's expression shifted, genuine surprise flickering across his face at her dismissal. He wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by supposed victims. "Think about our offer," he said, pulling out a business card. "Things change quickly in this business. Best to be on the right side of progress." Emely took the card, noting the weight of the paper, the subtle watermark. Cartel money never spared expense on appearances. As the vehicles pulled away, Miguel approached from the side of the house. "They had men checking the property lines while they kept you talking, looking for security cameras, entry points." "I know." Emely watched Reynolds' patrol car disappear down the road. "They'll be back. This was just the opening move." Inside her office, Emely activated her security system. The cameras Miguel and Daniel had helped her install over the years had captured everything. The facial recognition software she'd maintained from her military days would confirm identities. License plates could be traced. Her secure satellite phone buzzed, a text from Jack Torres, her former Special Forces teammate now working private security in Phoenix. "Got your message? Running checks on Southwest Agricultural. Something big is happening. Border Patrol reporting unusual patterns." Emely downloaded the encrypted files Torres had sent. He'd been busy. Detailed profiles of Ramirez's organization, property records showing the pattern of cartel acquisitions across 3 counties, financial transactions linking Southwest Agricultural to known Sinaloa Norte front companies. The sound of horses in distress pulled her attention outside. Carlos Martinez was riding up to her property, his usually well-kept stallion lathered and wild-eyed. Emely met him at the gate. "Emely," he dismounted shakily. "They burned my stables last night, said it was faulty wiring." He pulled out his phone, showing her pictures of the destruction. "My horses, Emely, 3 of them didn't make it out." She studied the images, recognizing the signature accelerant pattern of professional arsonists. "Did the sheriff investigate?" Reynolds took a report. Said sometimes old buildings just go up. Carlos's voice cracked. "They're watching my house, following Maria into town. We're selling, Emely. We don't have a choice." Emely laid a hand on her old friend's shoulder. "You do have a choice, Carlos, just not the one they're giving you." She led him inside, explaining her plan, how he could sell but help her gather evidence, how his property could become part of the trap she was laying. By evening, Emely had compiled preliminary evidence of the cartel's operation, property records, financial transactions, photos of known operatives. She encrypted everything, sending copies to secure servers Torres had arranged. The sound of vehicles passing her property had increased. Regular patrols by both cartel SUVs and sheriff's deputies. They were establishing presence, trying to wear her down through constant surveillance. Miguel and Daniel insisted on staying late, making obvious preparations to guard the property overnight. Emely knew they'd been approached too, offered money to spy on her, threatened when they refused. "My father served with Mr. Connor in the Marines," Miguel had said simply when she tried to give him an out. "Some things matter more than money or threats." Emely spent the night reviewing satellite images of her property and the surrounding areas. The cartel's pattern was clear. They were creating a corridor for drug shipments, using the agricultural properties as cover. Her ranch was the key piece, the last holdout in their plan. Her secure phone lit up with a message from Dr. Wilson. "More strangers in town asking about James, about your background. They're digging." Let them dig, she thought. Her cover was deep. 12 years of carefully documented civilian life, establishing her as nothing more than James Connor's widow, a simple rancher. The army had been thorough when they helped her transition to civilian life, but now, watching the cartel vehicles pass by in the darkness, Emely felt the familiar surge of adrenaline she hadn't experienced since her combat days. They thought they were investigating her, but she was already 3 steps ahead in investigating them. The next move would be theirs, probably something designed to escalate the pressure without leaving evidence. That's how these operations worked, gradually increasing intimidation until resistance seemed futile. But Emely had spent years studying operations exactly like this one. She knew their playbook, their tactics, their weaknesses. Most importantly, she knew that organizations like Sinaloa Norte relied on their targets feeling isolated and helpless. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who had once led elite teams in dismantling insurgent networks, someone who understood that patience, preparation, and precise intelligence were more powerful than brute force and intimidation. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new pressure, but tonight, Emely Connor, former Special Forces operator, rancher, mother, and now the only thing standing between Sinaloa Norte and their expansion plans, began laying the groundwork for a counter-offensive that would remind her old adversaries why underestimating their targets was always a fatal mistake. The sound of breaking glass shattered the pre-dawn silence. Emely was already moving. Muscle, memory from years of combat training taking over as she reached for her weapon. 3 distinct impacts: living room, kitchen, and study. Professional pattern designed to create maximum psychological impact without casualties. "Mrs. Connor," Miguel's voice carried from outside. "They hit the equipment shed too." Emely moved through her house methodically, checking each room. Broken windows, but no fire. They weren't trying to burn her out. This was a message, carefully calculated to escalate pressure without crossing legal lines. The equipment shed was a different story. Her main tractor's tires were slashed, fuel lines cut, and someone had opened the gates, letting her cattle loose. "Economic pressure," she muttered, "hitting my ability to maintain the ranch." They came in from the south fence. "A line," Daniel reported, examining tracks in the dirt. 4 men, maybe 5, military boots, professional spacing. Emely surveyed the damage while dialing Dr. Wilson's number. She answered on the first ring. "Already heard. Reynolds had a deputy parked near my clinic all night, watching. They didn't want any quick response to your place." "Need you to make some calls," Emely said quietly. "Remember that favor you mentioned? Time to cash it in." By sunrise, Emely had documented everything. Her hidden cameras had caught the perpetrators, faces covered, but their movements told her everything she needed to know. Former military, likely Cartel's Special Enforcement Unit, Sheriff Reynolds arrived around 8 Ruhi, making a show of taking notes and looking concerned. "Probably just local troublemakers," he suggested, not quite meeting Emely's eyes. Lot of that. Going around lately? Interesting timing, Emily replied, watching Reynolds' reactions carefully. Right after I turned down Mr. Ramirez's generous offer. Sometimes coincidences happen. Reynolds glanced at his phone as it buzzed. I'll increase patrols in the area. Don't trouble yourself, Sheriff. I've already made some calls of my own. The slight stiffening in Reynolds' posture told Emily her message had landed. The sheriff wasn't used to victims pushing back, suggesting they had resources of their own. After Reynolds left, a black pickup truck pulled up. Jack Torres stepped out, his civilian clothes doing little to hide his special forces bearing. Emily had served with him on 3 continents. There was no one she trusted more. Got your message, Torres said, scanning the property with practiced eyes. Brought some friends. 2 more vehicles appeared, carrying 4 men Emily recognized from her old unit. They moved with the quiet efficiency of operators who'd worked together for years. We've been monitoring Sinaloa Norte's movements, Torres explained as they walked the property. They're establishing a major pipeline through this region. Your ranch isn't just convenient, it's essential to their route. The terrain, the location, makes perfect sense for moving product north, Emily finished. I know, that's why we bought it. James always said this land was strategically valuable. Torres nodded grimly. Your husband had good instincts. Maybe too good. Emily, there's something else you need to know about his accident 2 years ago. It wasn't an accident, Emily said quietly. I've suspected for a while. The brake lines were cut professionally. I found traces of tool marks. But I needed proof, needed to know who. We think it was Sinaloa Norte. James was asking questions about strange vehicle movements, taking photos of license plates. He may have stumbled onto their early reconnaissance of the area. Emily absorbed this information with the cold focus she'd developed during combat operations. Then they've been planning this longer than we thought. The property acquisitions, the pressure campaign, it's all been building to this. Her satellite phone buzzed with updates from their surveillance team. The cartel's pattern was clear. 3 more properties along their proposed corridor had reported similar intimidation attempts. Torres pulled out a laptop, showing her thermal imaging of vehicle movements along the border. They're getting aggressive. Border patrols reporting. Unusual patterns. Something big is coming. By afternoon, Emily had confirmed her suspicions. The cartel wasn't just planning a drug route, they were establishing a permanent pipeline, complete with local law enforcement protection and political coverage. Miguel returned from town with more news. Reynolds had been seen meeting with Ramirez at the local diner, passing something under the table. Emily's cameras in the barn had caught cartel vehicles testing the back roads around her property, looking for blind spots. They're planning something bigger, she told Torres. This isn't just about my ranch anymore. Question is, Torres replied, how far up does the corruption go? And who can we trust? Emily studied the evidence they'd been gathering, the network they'd been mapping. Sometimes the best way to find out who's corrupt is to give them a chance to prove it. She pulled out satellite maps of the county, marking the properties already under cartel control. They think they're investigating me, looking for leverage. Time to give them something to find. Torres raised an eyebrow. Dangerous game, Emily. Life's dangerous, Jack. But sometimes the best defense is a carefully planned offense. As night fell, Emily watched more cartel vehicles pass her property. They were establishing patterns, waiting for her to break under the pressure. Instead, She was documenting every movement, every contact, every piece of evidence that would eventually bring them down. They thought they were dealing with a desperate single mother. They had no idea they were facing someone who had spent years learning how to dismantle operations exactly like theirs. Someone who understood that patience and precision were more powerful than brute force and intimidation. Her secure phone lit up with another message from Dr. Wilson. More cartel activity in town. They're pressuring local businesses to stop dealing with Shadow Creek Ranch, feed stores, equipment suppliers, even the bank's getting nervous. Emely's plans were already adapting, evolving. Years of Special Forces operations had taught her to see opportunities in enemy actions. Every move the cartel made to isolate her was actually giving her more evidence, more witnesses, more pieces to use against them. Emma appeared in the doorway of her office. "Mom, the kids at school, they're saying things about us having to sell, about how we can't hold out alone." Emily looked at her daughter, so much like James, with his quiet strength and determination. "We're not alone, sweetheart. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who stand up when everyone else backs down." Torres and his team had established a secure perimeter around the ranch, but Emily knew the cartel would be watching, gathering intelligence. Let them watch. Let them think they were in control. Her satellite phone buzzed again, a message from her old unit commander, now working in federal law enforcement. "Package received. Evidence is solid. Keep building the case. Backup ready when needed." The pieces were falling into place. The cartel thought they were tightening the noose, but they were actually walking into a trap years in the making. "Found something interesting," Torres said, reviewing surveillance footage. "Every time Ramirez visits a property, he's followed by the same vehicle, registered to a shell company linked to a state senator." Emily nodded. "The corruption goes higher than the sheriff's department. That's why they're so confident, so brazen. They think they've bought all the protection they need. They're not used to targets fighting back," Torres observed, "especially not targets with our kind of training." Through her cameras, Emily watched another cartel convoy pass slowly by her property. Their arrogance would be their downfall. They thought they were dealing with a simple rancher, but they were about to learn they were facing someone who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of fight. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new pressure. But Emely Connor was exactly where she needed to be, one step ahead of an enemy that had fatally underestimated their target. The ranch's surveillance system crashed at exactly 2:34 a.m. Security cameras, internet connection, even the basic cellular service all went dark simultaneously. Not a power failure. This was a coordinated cyber attack. Emily's satellite phone buzzed with a text from Torres. "They found your digital footprint. Marco Suarez is in play." Marco the Ghost Suarez, Sinaloa Norte's technology specialist and one of their most dangerous operatives. Emily had encountered his work once in Kandahar, though he wouldn't remember. She'd been someone else then, using a different name. "They're escalating," she told Torres over a secure line. "Bringing in their specialist means they're done playing games. Got movement at the border too," Torres replied, road noise in the background suggesting he was already en route. 3 trucks crossed at unauthorized points in the last hour. Heavy cargo, military escort. Emily moved through her darkened house, checking backup systems she'd installed years ago. Old habits and paranoia had paid off. redundant cameras running on separate power, hidden hardlines for communication, and emergency protocols she'd maintained since her special forces days. The sound of Miguel's truck approaching carried through, the pre-dawn silence. He wasn't due for hours. Something was wrong. They hit the feed store, he reported as soon as she opened the door. Computer systems crashed, accounts wiped. Owner said they lost everything: inventory, customer records, payment systems. They're isolating us, Emely noted, cutting off supplies, disrupting business connections, standard cartel tactics, create dependency, then offer solutions. Her secure phone lit up with another message from Torres. Satellite shows convoy, heading your way. 6 vehicles, heavy weapons. Suarez's signature move, tech attack followed by show of force. Emely checked her weapons, then called Dr. Wilson. Time to activate that backup plan we discussed. Already done, Wilson replied. My brother's place is ready. Underground server room completely isolated from local networks. Just like old times. Emely allowed herself a small smile. Wilson had been more than just a local vet. She'd been their team's medical support during operations in Afghanistan. Some networks never really disappeared. Torres arrived as the sun was rising, bringing news from Phoenix. They're moving faster than we anticipated. 3 judges suddenly took vacation. 2 border patrol supervisors called in sick. They're clearing the board for something big. Emely spread out her maps, now marked with updated cartel movements. Not just something big. Look at the pattern. They're setting up a major distribution hub, Shadow Creek's location, the properties they've acquired, the officials they've compromised. This isn't just about moving product anymore. They're establishing permanent infrastructure, Torres agreed, studying the patterns, using agricultural properties as cover for... He was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. Not the usual cartel SUVs. These were larger, military-grade transport trucks. Emely's remaining cameras showed 6 vehicles moving with tactical precision. Right on schedule, she murmured. Suarez likes to make an entrance. The truck stopped just outside her property line. Men in tactical gear deployed in standard formation, but they didn't advance. This was a show of force meant to intimidate. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up last. The man who stepped out moved with calculated grace. Marco Suarez, looking exactly as he had 5 years ago in surveillance photos from Mexico City, down to his signature wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Connor, his voice carried across her property. I believe we should talk about your computer problems. Perhaps over coffee? Emely stepped onto her porch, projecting the perfect image of a concerned but unafraid property owner. It seems like a lot of manpower just to discuss technical issues, Mr. Suarez. His smile faltered slightly. She wasn't supposed to know his name. You've done your research. Good. That will make this conversation more productive. Inside, Torres had positioned himself with a clear line of sight, weapon ready. Emely had insisted he not reveal his law enforcement status yet. That card needed to be played at the right moment. You've been making things difficult, Mrs. Connor, Suarez continued, remaining by his car. Making certain accusations, gathering certain information that's dangerous in today's digital world. Systems crash, records disappear, reputations are ruined. Interesting theory, Emely replied. Almost as interesting as the records I have of your organization's financial transactions, the ones stored on servers you can't reach. Another slight falter in his smile. She was proving more troublesome than expected. Sheriff Reynolds mentioned you were stubborn. he said. "But surely you understand your position. You're alone here, no support, no protection. Accidents happen in isolated areas." Emely's phone buzzed. A message from Torres showing thermal satellite images. More cartel vehicles were approaching from the south. Heavy trucks carrying serious cargo. "Actually," Emely smiled, "I don't think I'm the one who needs to understand their position." On cue, 3 unmarked vans appeared on the road behind Suarez's. Convoy, Dr. Wilson's backup plan, private security contractors she'd arranged through old military connections. Not law enforcement, not official, but enough to change the game's dynamics. Suarez's men shifted nervously, caught between unknown forces and their objective. This wasn't how these operations usually went. Targets weren't supposed to have resources, weren't supposed to fight back effectively. "Think carefully about your next move," Emely advised. "Those servers I mentioned, they're uploading interesting data about your operation every hour. Anything happens to me or mine, everything goes public. And I mean everything, including your personal accounts in Panama." Suarez's expression hardened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Connor, one you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly. Question is, do you?" The standoff lasted another 10 minutes before Suarez and his convoy withdrew. They'd be back, but they'd lost the initiative. The game had changed. "That was bold," Torres said afterward. "Maybe too bold. They'll dig deeper now, try to figure out who you really are." "Let them dig," Emely replied, watching the thermal images of those heavy trucks heading south. "While they're focusing on me, they'll miss what we're really doing." She turned to her maps, marking new patterns, identifying weaknesses. Sinaloa Norte had shown their hand, bringing in Suarez, escalating to cyber attacks, moving major shipments. Now it was time to make them pay for their mistake. The cartel thought they were hunting a simple single mother. They were about to learn. They were actually the ones being hunted. The phone calls started at midnight. Every hour on the hour, Emely's landline would ring exactly 3 times. No messages, no voices, just the psychological pressure of knowing someone was watching, waiting, measuring her responses. "Classic cartel tactic," she explained to Torres as they reviewed surveillance footage. "Sleep deprivation, constant reminder of vulnerability. They use this in Helmand against local officials." "You seem well informed about cartel tactics," Torres observed carefully. It wasn't the first time he'd noted her unusual knowledge. "Let's just say my special forces training covered more than direct action missions." She deflected smoothly, focusing on the monitors. Her remaining cameras had caught interesting activity. Sheriff Reynolds meeting with an unfamiliar man at the edge of town. The exchange was quick, professional, practiced. Marco Vega, Torres identified the man. Border Patrol, but his finances don't match his salary. Been on our radar for months. Emely's satellite phone buzzed with an update from their surveillance team. Thermal imaging showed increased activity along the border. Vehicles gathering, waiting for something. "They're planning a major move," Emely noted, marking positions on her map. "Using multiple crossings to divide response resources." Classic misdirection. The morning brought more psychological pressure. Every business in Shadow Creek that dealt with Connor Ranch received visits from health inspectors, tax auditors, regulatory officials, all finding serious violations that required immediate attention. "They're trying to isolate you," Torres said, watching another feed store turn away Miguel's supply run. "Cut off your support network, make you feel alone." "Actually," Emely smiled slightly, "they're making a mistake, giving us a list of every official they've corrupted." Dr. Wilson arrived with more news. She'd treated one of Reynolds's deputies for a broken hand. Officially from a car door, actually from punching a wall in frustration, department splitting. Some deputies don't like playing cartel enforcers. Jenkins and Martinez especially, they've been documenting everything. Emely processed this information, seeing opportunities. Internal division within law enforcement could be leveraged, especially with the right pressure. Her secure phone lit up with another message from their surveillance team. Border Patrol shift schedules changed. Vega arranging coverage gaps tomorrow night. They're moving too fast, Torres frowned, reading the message. This level of acceleration means they're desperate. Exactly, Emely finished. Suarez's cyber attack failed. Their intimidation tactics aren't working. They need a win. A truck approached the property. Carlos Martinez's son, looking nervous. Emely met him at the gate. Dad, said to give you this. He handed over a thick envelope. Said it's about the men who've been watching our place, their patterns, their conversations. He's been keeping track. Inside the envelope, Emely found detailed notes, photos taken with a concealed phone, times and dates of cartel movements. Carlos hadn't just sold his ranch. He'd turned it into an intelligence-gathering operation. Your father's a brave man, she told the boy. Make sure he knows we've got his back. By afternoon, the pieces were falling into place. Emely's network of cameras and informants painted a clear picture. The cartel was planning something big, using multiple properties along their acquired corridor. They'll hit 3 crossing points, she explained to Torres, marking locations. Small shipments at 2 points to draw attention, major cargo through the 3rd. Vega will ensure that crossing is clear. How can you be so sure of their tactics? Emely allowed herself a small smile, because it's what I would do if I were them. A commotion at the main gate interrupted their planning. Dr. Wilson's truck skidded to a stop, her usually calm demeanor shaken. They were waiting at my clinic, she reported. Reynolds and 2 men I didn't recognize said they'd received complaints about my prescribing practices, threatening an audit, license suspension. They're identifying threats, Emely noted. Moving to neutralize anyone who might help us. Her satellite phone buzzed again, their surveillance team sending updated thermal images. The cartel's vehicles were moving into position along the border. Tomorrow night's operation was clearly significant. They'd brought in additional muscle, heavy trucks designed for serious cargo. We need to move first, Torres insisted. Hit them before they're ready. No. Emely studied the patterns, seeing something deeper. They're scared, making mistakes. Look at their deployment. Too many men, too obvious. They're showing their hand. She turned to her maps, marking new patterns, seeing opportunities where others might see threats. The cartel's pressure had revealed their network. Corrupt officials, compromised officers, border patrol collaborators. Each piece of their operation was now visible if you knew how to look. Tomorrow night, she told Torres, they'll try to run their shipment, but they've forgotten the first rule of warfare. Never let your enemy choose the battlefield. She laid out her plan, watching Torres's expression shift from doubt to understanding. The cartel thought they were tightening the noose, but they were actually walking into a trap years in the making. As night fell, the phone calls continued their hourly rhythm, but Emely wasn't answering. She was busy preparing, laying out equipment, checking weapons, establishing communication protocols. 2 decades of Special Forces operations had taught her patience, preparation, and the value of letting your enemy think they had the upper hand. Tomorrow night would change everything. The cartel would learn that their psychological warfare had failed, their intimidation had backfired, and their careful plans had been compromised by the very pressure they applied. They thought their show of force had demonstrated their power. Instead, it had revealed their weaknesses, their patterns, and their vulnerabilities. Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Emma at Dr. Wilson's brother's ranch where she'd been safely hidden. "Be careful, Mom. Show them what a Connor can do." Chatter. Pieces were in place. The trap was set. Now all that remained was to let the cartel's own desperation and arrogance drive them straight into it. The pre-dawn quiet of Shadow Creek was shattered by the sound of breaking glass and angry shouts at the sheriff's department. Two deputies were facing off, Jenkins holding a stack of papers, Martinez standing between him and Sheriff Reynolds's. "Office, you can't bury this," Jenkins insisted, his voice carrying across the empty station. 3 weeks of surveillance logs, vehicle plates, meeting times. They're running more than drugs through those properties. Emily watched the scene unfold through the station security feed, courtesy of Torres's hack into the system. The internal fractures she'd predicted were spreading faster than expected. "Departments coming apart," Torres observed, reviewing the footage in Emily's office. "Reynolds can't control his own people anymore." That's not all he can't control. Emily pulled up thermal images from the previous night. They showed Cartel. Vehicles moving erratically, different teams operating without coordination. Ramirez is losing his grip too. His people are getting sloppy, breaking patterns. Her satellite phone buzzed. Dr. Wilson sending coded updates. She'd converted her brother's basement into a surveillance hub, using her legitimate business contacts to monitor cartel movements through the town. "Large shipment coming tonight," she reported. "But something's wrong. They're rushing, making mistakes. Just watched 2 of their trucks nearly collide at the Martinez property." Emily checked her maps, now marked with updated patrol routes and camera positions. The cartel's original plan had been elegant, using the acquired properties to create a seamless smuggling corridor. But their accelerated timeline was creating chaos. "They're scared," she explained to Torres. Suarez's cyber attack failed. Their intimidation tactics backfired, and now they're hearing whispers about federal investigation. Fear makes people sloppy. Miguel arrived with more intelligence gathered from his contacts in town. The feed stores and equipment suppliers that had turned him away were now facing their own problems. Surprise inspections, license reviews, tax audits. The cartel's pressure tactics were creating unexpected resistance. "People are talking," Miguel reported. Remembering how things were before, asking questions about all these new agricultural investments showing up at once. Emily's secure line lit up with an urgent message from their surveillance team. The thermal imaging had caught something new. Weapons cases being moved through the Carlos Martinez property. Military-grade hardware, definitely not part of normal. Drug operations. "This is bigger than we thought." Torres studied the images. "They're not just setting up a distribution hub. They're establishing a full logistics center. Drugs, weapons, probably human trafficking too." "Makes sense," Emily noted, marking new patterns on her maps. Shadow Creek's location is perfect. Remote enough for security, close enough to major transport routes. The agricultural cover provides legitimate reason for heavy truck traffic. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. Through her remaining cameras, Emily watched 3 cartel SUVs stop near her property line. But instead of the usual intimidation show, the men seemed to be arguing among themselves. "Internal conflict," she observed. Ramirez's people don't trust Suarez's team. The cyber warfare unit wants to handle things their way, while the enforcers prefer direct action. Can we use that? Torres asked. Already am. Emily pulled up emails she'd carefully crafted. Anonymous tips to different cartel factions, each suggesting other teams were working against them. Divide and conquer. Basic special forces tradecraft. A truck arrived from Dr. Wilson's clinic carrying medical supplies, but hidden among the legitimate deliveries were new surveillance devices, carefully positioned to fill gaps in their coverage. Tonight's shipment, Emily explained, showing Torres the predicted routes. They'll split it 3 ways: weapons through the Martinez property, drugs through the Richardson farm, and something else. Something they're being very careful about through the Anderson ranch. How can you be so sure? Because that's how I do it, Emily smiled slightly. Multiple shipments, different contents, scattered routes, makes it harder to track, harder to intercept. But they're forgetting something crucial. What's that? They're playing by an old playbook, Emily replied, thinking of countless missions, planning exactly these kinds of operations. One I helped write during my Special Forces days. The afternoon brought more signs of the cartel's deteriorating coordination. 2 of Reynolds's corrupt deputies got into a fistfight behind the gas station, and Suarez's tech team was seen arguing with Ramirez's security detail. The careful hierarchy was crumbling. Emily spent the remaining daylight hours positioning her assets. Miguel and Daniel, both former military themselves, understood their roles perfectly. Dr. Wilson's clinic was ready to serve its dual purpose. Even Carlos Martinez, operating from his sold property, had his part to play. They'll make their move around midnight, she told Torres as they finalized preparations. 3 simultaneous shipments, coordinated with Border Patrol shift changes. They think spreading us thin is their advantage. It's not. No. Emily checked her equipment one final time. Their biggest mistake was giving us time to prepare, time to study their patterns, identify their weaknesses, and set our own trap. As darkness fell, the cartel's vehicles began moving into position. They maintained radio silence, used counter-surveillance. Measures followed all the proper protocols. But Emily had spent 15 years learning how to see through such tactics. Tonight, the cartel would learn a harsh lesson about underestimating their opponents. Mrs. Connor, Daniel's voice crackled through the secure radio. Movement at your property line, 3 vehicles, black SUVs. Emily checked the thermal imaging. Standard intimidation pattern. Let them circle. They're trying to rattle us before the main operation. Her satellite phone buzzed, Torres sending updated intelligence. The border checkpoints were being cleared exactly as predicted. Vega had arranged for specific crossing points to be conveniently understaffed. Second convoy emerging from the Martinez property, Miguel reported from his observation post in the old water tower. Military-grade cases visible in the truck beds. They're not even trying to hide the weapons anymore. They're scared, Emily replied. Fear makes people sloppy. Suarez's cyber attack failed. Ramirez's intimidation tactics backfired, and now they're rushing to prove themselves. Through their surveillance network, Emily watched as what should have been a carefully coordinated operation began falling apart. Different cartel teams were operating independently. Traditional command structure breaking down under pressure. The clinic's door opened as Dr. Wilson hurried in. Sheriff's department is falling apart. Reynolds just found Jenkins's evidence stash. There was a fight. Martinez pulled his weapon. Reynolds backed down, but it's getting ugly. Emily watched the thermal imaging as the third convoy began moving through the Anderson ranch. Something about their formation caught her attention. The cargo trucks were running dark, but with heavy escort. Whatever they were moving, it was important enough to risk obvious security. Suarez's team is breaking protocol, Torres observed. They're using active radio communications, encrypted but traceable. Not just traceable, Emely smiled slightly. Recordable. Our systems are catching everything. The first sign that the trap was working came from the Martinez property. Ramirez's security team and Suarez's cyber unit got into a heated argument about route changes. In their paranoia, each faction suspected the other of sabotage. Should we intervene? Torres asked, watching the confrontation escalate. Not yet. Let them make mistakes. The more they fight each other, the more evidence they create. Emely's phone buzzed. A text from Carlos Martinez, still playing his part as a cooperative former owner. The cartel's weapons cache in his old barn was being moved, but in their haste, they'd left documentation behind. They're running scared, Dr. Wilson noted, watching the thermal feeds. Look at their formation. No coordination between teams. No proper security spacing. They're just trying to get it done fast. Through their surveillance network, Emely watched as Marco Vega made his fatal mistake. The corrupt Border Patrol agent was so focused on maintaining his cover that he didn't notice Jenkins and Martinez documenting his every move. All the pieces are in place, Emely told her team. Time for phase 2. Across Shadow Creek, carefully planted evidence began surfacing. Anonymous tips led honest deputies to cartel staging areas. Accidental gaps in security revealed weapon shipments to passing civilians. Each discovery was photographed, documented, and added to the growing pile of evidence. Reynolds is panicking, Torres reported. She just called Ramirez directly from her patrol car. Full confession on our recording devices, talking about payoffs, protection arrangements, everything. Emely's satellite phone lit up with another update from their surveillance team. The thermal imaging had caught something unexpected, a fourth convoy trying to slip through while everyone was focused on the other three. They're using their own distraction against themselves, Emely realized. The left hand doesn't know what the right is doing anymore. Dr. Wilson's basement hummed with activity as they tracked multiple moving pieces. Miguel and Daniel maintained their surveillance positions, documenting every vehicle, every exchange, every mistake the cartel made in their rush to complete the operation. Suarez's team is breaking away, Dr. Wilson reported, watching the feed. They're abandoning the planned routes, trying something different. Let them, Emely replied. The more they deviate from plan, the more evidence they create. The more they fight each other, the more they reveal. Through her cameras, Emely watched as the carefully planned operation descended into chaos. Ramirez's people didn't trust Suarez's team. Suarez's cyber unit thought Ramirez's enforcers were compromised. Sheriff Reynolds couldn't control his deputies, and Marco Vega was too busy covering his tracks to coordinate the border crossings. They're making every mistake in the book, Torres observed, because they're following a playbook designed to fail, Emely explained. Every route, every checkpoint, every safe house, they're all compromised. They just don't know it yet. As the operation continued to unravel, Emely thought about how the cartel's own arrogance had led them here. They'd thought their show of force would intimidate a single mother. Instead, it had given her everything she needed to destroy them. Emily's secure phone buzzed with urgent updates. The evidence they'd been releasing was causing unprecedented chaos. Three separate cartel factions had turned on each other, each believing the others were compromised. Mrs. Connor, Miguel's voice crackled through the radio. Large convoy approaching from the south. Looks like cartel leadership. They're coming themselves. Emely checked the thermal imaging. Three heavily armored SUVs were moving toward Shadow Creek, flanked by security details. The cartel's top commanders were taking the field personally, exactly as she'd predicted. They're desperate, Torres noted. Coming here themselves is a huge risk. It's also their final mistake, Emely replied. Sometimes the best trap isn't the one that catches your enemy. It's the one that makes them expose themselves. Through their cameras, they watched as the cartel leadership convoy entered Shadow Creek. Their presence was like throwing gasoline on an already volatile situation. Different factions began competing for attention, trying to prove their loyalty while simultaneously suspecting each other of betrayal. Found something in Reynolds's files, Dr. Wilson reported, sorting through data from the sheriff's office hack. Detailed records of government collaborators goes all the way to state level. The revelation added another layer to their understanding. The cartel hadn't just been building a smuggling route, they'd been establishing a power base for something much larger. That's why they sent Suarez, Torres realized. This isn't just about one ranch or one operation anymore. This is about their entire organization. Emely's trap was working better than expected. The cartel's own paranoia and internal rivalries had accelerated their collapse. Each team's desperate attempt to save themselves had only exposed more of their operation. Mrs. Connor, Daniel's voice came through the radio. Multiple cartel vehicles converging on the Martinez property. Looks like Ramirez's men and Suarez's team are about to clash directly. Through their surveillance, they watched as years of cartel discipline crumbled in a single night. The property corridor they'd established had become a trap of their own making. Every route they'd secured was compromised, every safe house exposed, every corrupt official documented. They're splitting up, Miguel reported. Security teams abandoning their positions. Every man for himself now. Emely watched through her surveillance network as years of cartel hierarchy collapsed. The mighty Sinaloa Norte, who had terrorized 3 states, was coming apart in front of her cameras. Last data package confirmed, Torres messaged. Every shell company, every corrupt official, every hidden account, it's all being uploaded now. Their entire infrastructure is exposed. The night was far from over, but already the cartel's carefully constructed operation was in ruins. Their own aggressive timeline, their internal rivalries, and their desperate need to prove themselves had made them vulnerable to Emely's careful manipulation. What they didn't realize was that this was just the beginning. The real trap, the one that would destroy not just this operation, but the entire cartel's presence in the region, was still to come. The first explosion rocked Dr. Wilson's clinic at 2:43 a.m. Suarez's team had breached the outer perimeter, but they didn't realize they were walking into a carefully prepared kill zone. Not with bullets, but with evidence. They found the server room decoy, Emely reported calmly, watching through the real surveillance system hidden 2 floors below. Right on schedule. Suarez's cyber team swarmed what they thought was the command center, only to find, carefully, blunted evidence linking their own leadership to unauthorized operations. The confusion on their faces was visible through Emely's cameras. Reynolds just made her move. Torres's voice crackled through the secure line. She's at the station with her remaining loyal deputies, trying to destroy evidence, but she's walking right into Jenkins and Martinez's trap. Emily's satellite phone buzzed with urgent updates from their surveillance team. The thermal imaging had caught something dramatic at the border. The third convoy, the one everyone thought was stuck at inspection, had broken through. But they weren't heading north as expected. "They're running," Emely observed, watching the heat signatures move rapidly south. Someone in cartel leadership figured it out. They're cutting their losses. Through their surveillance network, they watched as Ramirez's remaining forces clashed with Suarez's team at the Richardson farm. Neither side realized they were fighting over a position that was already compromised. "Mrs. Connor," Miguel's voice was tense through the radio. "Movement at the Martinez property. They're accessing the hidden basement." Emily's trap was entering its final phase. The basement contained exactly what she wanted them to find. Evidence of internal cartel betrayals, each piece carefully selected to cause maximum disruption. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the south," Daniel reported from his position. "Not cartel, local ranchers and farmers. They're blocking the escape routes." The town was finally fighting back. After weeks of intimidation, seeing the cartel operation crumbling had given them courage. Every road out of Shadow Creek was being blocked by tractors, trucks, and farm equipment. Suarez found the second server room, Dr. Wilson reported, watching the security feeds. "They think they've hit the jackpot, but they're actually downloading everything we want them to find." Through their cameras, they watched as the cartel's elite teams began surrendering. Years of iron discipline meant nothing against the weight of evidence now public. "Emely," Torres called urgently, "found something in the final files, the order to kill James. It came from inside the cartel leadership. Ramirez gave the order himself." "I know," she answered calmly. "That's why this had to be public. Some enemies are too powerful to fight in the shadows." Dr. Wilson's clinic continued coordinating with their network of allies, but the real battle was already won. The cartel's attempt to control one small town had led to their complete exposure. "Final confirmation," their surveillance team reported. "Every major law enforcement agency just received our evidence package. The whole operation is exposed." The afternoon sun cast stark shadows as the cartel leadership faced their final moments of freedom. They had come to crush a local rebellion. Instead, they had walked into a trap 3 years in the making. "James always said," Emily's voice carried across the radio network, "that the best weapon against corruption is the truth. Today, everyone sees that truth." The cartel commanders found themselves with no options left. Their organization was exposed, their allies were abandoning them, and their own people were turning against them. "It's over," Emely announced over the clinic's speaker system. "Your empire is falling, your secrets are exposed, and Shadow Creek will be remembered as the place where it all came crashing down." The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder as federal law enforcement closed in. But the real victory wasn't in the arrests to come. It was in the exposure of truth that could never be hidden again. Through their surveillance, they watched as Suarez made one final attempt to salvage the situation. The cartel's master hacker, known for solving impossible problems, found himself facing one he couldn't eliminate. "You don't understand what you've done," he called out to Emely. "The people behind this operation, they're more powerful than you know." "You mean the state officials?" Emily's voice carried through the clinic speakers. "The corrupt border, patrol agents, the bought politicians, they're all exposed now too." "Mrs. Connor," Torres's voice came through the secure line. "Final data package just went live. Every connection, every payoff, every hidden deal. It's all public now. The cartel commanders turned on each other, years of hidden rivalries erupting into open conflict. Each blamed the others for the catastrophic failure of their Shadow Creek operation. It was never about the ranch, Emely continued through the speakers. This town, these people, they were never just victims. They were witnesses, and now the whole world is watching. International task force moving in, Torres reported. But Emely, these files you released, the connections they reveal, how long have you really been planning this? Since they killed James, she replied. He wasn't just investigating local cartel activity. He found something bigger, something that went all the way to the state capital. That's why they had to silence him. Through their surveillance, they watched as Shadow Creek's residents maintained their positions. Every street had become a testament to organized resistance, every resident a part of living history. Multiple cartel vehicles attempting to break out, Miguel reported, but there's nowhere to go. Every route is covered either by law enforcement or locals. Emely's satellite phone lit up with updates from around the region. The evidence they'd released was causing unprecedented chaos in centers of power. Banks were freezing accounts, corporations were launching internal investigations, government officials were calling emergency sessions. Your own people are abandoning you, Emely. Address the cartel leaders through the clinic system. Every corrupt official, every bought politician, they're all running for cover. You have no protection left. Suarez's professional demeanor finally cracked. You were special forces, he accused. All this time, this whole operation, it was government sanctioned. No, Emely replied. This was personal. The army taught me how to dismantle criminal empires, but they never imagined one of their former operators would use those skills to expose corruption in their own ranks. Through their cameras, they watched as the cartel's elite teams began surrendering. Years of iron discipline meant nothing against the weight of evidence now public. Emely, Torres called urgently, found something in the final files. The order to kill James. It went higher than Ramirez. Someone in the state government approved it. I know, she answered calmly. That's why this had to be public. Some enemies are too powerful to fight in the shadows. Dr. Wilson's clinic continued, coordinating with law enforcement. But the real battle was already won. The cartel's attempt to control one small town had led to their complete exposure. Final confirmation, their surveillance team reported. Every major news outlet is running the story. Social media is exploding. The evidence is spreading faster than anyone can contain it. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as the cartel leadership faced their final moments of freedom. They had come to crush a local rebellion. Instead, they had walked into a trap 3 years in the making. James always believed, Emely's voice carried across the radio network, that the truth was the most powerful weapon against corruption. Today, everyone sees that truth. The cartel commanders found themselves with no options left. Their organization was exposed. Their allies were abandoning them, and their own people were turning against them. It's over, Emely announced through the clinic's speakers. Your empire is falling. Your secrets are exposed, and Shadow Creek will be remembered as the place where it all came crashing down. The thump of helicopter rotors grew louder as federal tactical teams moved into position. But Emely Connor was watching something more significant unfold through her surveillance network. The mighty cartel that had terrorized 3 states was crumbling before her eyes, brought down by the very pressure they had tried to use against her. Final counts coming in. Miguel reported from his position. 17 senior cartel members in custody, their entire command structure dismantled. In a single afternoon, Emely watched through her surveillance feeds as years of carefully laid plans reached their culmination. The formidable organization that had threatened her ranch had become evidence of their own crimes. Confirmation from across the border. Torres messaged, rival cartels moving into Sinaloa Norte territory. Their entire organization is collapsing. No one wants to be associated with them now. Through their cameras, they watched as Suarez, the cartel's legendary tech specialist, finally surrendered. His reputation for solving impossible problems had ended in Shadow Creek, Arizona. "You have to understand," he told Emely, as federal agents led him away. "We were building something bigger than just a cartel. The connections, the power structure." "I know," Emely replied. "That's why it had to be exposed this way. Some truths need the whole world as a witness." Dr. Wilson arrived with updates from town. The local clinic was treating minor injuries, but more importantly, it was gathering statements from residents ready to testify about cartel activities. "Everyone's talking now," she reported. "Years of fear turning into determination. They want to make sure this can never happen again. International Task Force has secured all cartel properties." Torres's voice crackled through the radio. "Evidence recovery teams are finding more than we expected. This goes deeper than anyone imagined." Emely checked her monitors one last time, watching as justice finally caught up with those who had killed her husband. James always said corruption can't survive in the light. Today proved him right. Through their surveillance, they watched as Shadow Creek transformed. Streets that had been quiet with fear, now filled with residents celebrating their freedom. The town had become a symbol of resistance. Multiple arrests at state level, Torres reported. Corrupt officials, bought politicians, compromised law enforcement. "Your evidence is causing a chain reaction." Emely's satellite phone lit up with updates from around the world. Banks were freezing suspicious accounts. Corporations were severing ties with cartel front companies. Governments were launching investigations. "Found something in Ramirez's files," Torres called. "Detailed records of James's murder, names, dates, the whole operation. We can finally prove who ordered it." "Make it public," Emely instructed. "All of it. Some truths need to be heard by everyone." Shadow Creek's residents gathered in the town square, watching as federal teams secured evidence and arrested the last cartel members. The fear that had gripped their community for so long was finally lifting. "Mrs. Connor," Miguel reported from his position. "Local ranchers are claiming their properties. Carlos Martinez is already moving back to his land. The cartel's territory grab is falling apart." Through their cameras, they watched as international media descended on the small Arizona town. Shadow Creek's resistance had become global news, a story of courage against corruption. "Final data confirmation," Dr. Wilson announced. "Every piece of evidence we gathered, every connection we exposed, it's all been verified. They can't hide from this anymore." The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Emely walked her property one last time as a battleground. Soon it would return to being just a ranch, but its role in history was secure. "You've started something bigger than just taking down one cartel," Torres observed. "This exposure, these revelations, they're going to force changes at every level." "That's what James would have wanted," Emely replied. "He believed in fighting corruption, no matter how powerful the corrupt might be." The sound of helicopters began to fade as federal teams completed their operation, but the real impact was just beginning. Shadow Creek had become more than just a town. It was now a testament to the power of truth against corruption. Reports coming in from Mexico, Torres messaged. Sinaloa Norte's entire infrastructure is collapsing. No one wants to be connected to them anymore. Your evidence release worked perfectly. Through their surveillance, they watched as the last cartel vehicles were impounded. Years of criminal empire building had ended in a small Arizona town, brought down by the single mother they had underestimated. It's really over, Torres said, watching the final arrests. Not just the cartel, but the whole corrupt system they built. No one's going to be able to rebuild this. Emely smiled slightly, thinking of James's belief in justice. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest places. All it takes is people willing to stand up and tell the truth. Shadow Creek began the process of healing, but it would never be the same. The town had proven that even the most powerful criminal organizations could be brought down when people stood together against corruption. Dawn broke over Shadow Creek the next morning, revealing a town forever changed. News vans lined the streets where cartel vehicles had prowled just hours before, as the world tried to understand how a small Arizona community had brought down one of the most powerful criminal organizations in history. Final arrest numbers. Confirmed, Torres reported, reviewing the operation statistics. 37 cartel members, 22 corrupt officials, and 15 international conspirators, all from one small town's resistance. Emely stood on her porch, watching as federal teams continued processing evidence from the cartel's abandoned properties. The ranch that had been their target was now a symbol of defiance against corruption. International impact reports coming in, Torres messaged. The criminal organizations worldwide are scrambling to distance themselves from Sinaloa Norte. Your evidence release has started a domino effect. Through their remaining surveillance, they watched as Shadow Creek began its recovery. Carlos Martinez led other ranchers in reclaiming their properties, erasing all signs of cartel presence. Found something interesting in the final evidence sweep, Miguel reported. Documentation of every threat they made, every property they targeted. They documented their own crimes perfectly. Dr. Wilson's clinic had returned to treating routine medical issues, but now it held a different meaning for the town. It had been their command center, their rallying point against corruption. The media is calling it the Shadow Creek Uprising, Torres said, showing Emely the headlines. Small town takes down international cartel. You're going to have a hard time maintaining a low profile after this. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones, Emely replied, watching local farmers return to their normal routines. The shaded ones that let people live their lives in peace. Through their network, they monitored the continuing aftermath. Banks worldwide were freezing suspicious accounts. Governments were launching investigations, and corrupt officials were facing justice. Emely, Torres messaged urgently. Just got confirmation. They're releasing the full investigation into James's death. Every person involved, every detail they tried to hide. It's all coming out. The town square filled with residents no longer afraid to gather in public. Shadow Creek had changed from a community living in fear to one that had shown the world how to stand against corruption. Multiple indictments coming from state government, Torres reported. Your evidence exposed corruption at levels nobody expected. This is going to reshape law enforcement across the Southwest. Emely's satellite phone buzzed with updates from around the world. The exposure of Sinaloa Norte's operations had created a ripple effect, forcing criminal organizations everywhere to retreat and regroup. The ranch hands are returning. Miguel announced. All the families who fled cartel threats, they're coming home. The town's coming back to life. Through their cameras, they watched as Shadow Creek began dismantling the last traces of cartel presence. Every property they had seized, every business they had threatened was being reclaimed. Found more in Suarez's files, Daniel reported. Complete records of their attempted takeover. They really thought they were untouchable. Dr. Wilson arrived with news from her medical contacts. The cartel's entire support structure is collapsing. Even their legitimate businesses are being exposed and shut down. James would be proud, Emely said quietly, watching her community heal. He always said the truth was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The afternoon brought more revelations as federal teams continued processing evidence. The cartel's attempt to control one small town had led to the exposure of corruption across 3 states. 1 month after the cartel's fall, Shadow Creek had returned to its quiet routines. The only signs of the historic events were subtle, new. Security cameras on local businesses, regular police patrols, and a small memorial in the town square dedicated to those who had stood against corruption. Final report from the task force, Torres said, joining Emely on her porch. 217 arrests across 12 states, over $3 billion in seized assets, all because they tried to pressure one single mother in Arizona. Emely watched. Her cattle graze peacefully, the ranch, once again, just a ranch. The surveillance equipment remained, but now it protected rather than hunted. Latest updates from the border, Torres messaged. Sinaloa Norte is officially finished. Their territory, split between rivals, their leadership imprisoned, their empire destroyed. Shadow Creek was their last operation. Throughout the town, signs of healing were everywhere. Carlos Martinez's barn had been rebuilt stronger than before. The sheriff's department, under new leadership, had become a model of community policing. You know what's remarkable, Dr. Wilson observed, stopping by after her rounds. Not just that we won, but how we won. No bloodshed, no violence, just the truth coming to light. The clinic had returned to treating routine medical issues. Its role as a command center, now just a proud memory. But its basement still held secured evidence, testimony to history. Found the last piece of James's investigation, Torres reported quietly. He wasn't just tracking cartel operations. He was building a case against corruption in our own state government. That's why they had to stop him. And that's why we had to expose everything, Emely replied, touching her husband's photo. Some truths need the whole world to witness them. Miguel and Daniel had stayed on at the ranch, but their roles had evolved. They'd become leaders in the community's new security network, teaching others how to protect themselves legally and effectively. The Ranchers Association meeting went well, Miguel reported. Everyone's implementing the new security protocols. No one's taking safety for granted anymore. Through their remaining cameras, they watched Shadow Creek thrive. Businesses reopened, families returned, and the fear that had gripped the town was replaced by quiet determination. International news still covering the aftermath, Torres messaged. They're calling it the Shadow Creek effect. Communities worldwide standing up to organized crime. You started something bigger than just stopping one cartel. Emely's satellite phone had gotten quieter, but the important messages continued. Tips about suspicious activities, updates on investigations, and reports of other communities fighting back against corruption. The federal investigation is officially Closed, Torres announced. Every person involved in James's death has been identified and charged. He got the justice he deserved. Dr. Wilson brought more news from her medical network. The exposure of cartel operations had led to improved security at hospitals and clinics across the border region, saving countless lives. You know what James would say about all this? Emely mused, watching the sunset over her land. He'd say the best weapon against evil isn't violence, it's bringing the truth into the light. The afternoon brought more visitors, honest officials seeking advice, journalists wanting to understand, and regular people looking for hope. Shadow Creek had become a symbol of resistance done right. Final statistics from Washington. Torres reported, your evidence led to the exposure of corruption in 32 government agencies, 15 major corporations, and 6 international banks. The cleanup's still ongoing. Through their surveillance, they watched as life in Shadow Creek settled into new patterns, regular security meetings, community watch programs, and a population that understood the importance of staying vigilant. You know they'll write books about this, Daniel remarked, helping repair fencing. How one small town brought down an international criminal empire. Let them write, Emely replied. But make sure they understand. It wasn't one person or one town. It was people choosing to stand together against corruption. As evening fell, Emely stood on her porch one last time as the hero of Shadow Creek. Tomorrow, she would just be a rancher again, and that's exactly how she wanted it. Some victories, she told Torres, are best measured in the quiet moments, in people living their lives without fear, in communities standing strong together, in truth finally seeing the light. Shadow Creek had shown the world that even the most powerful criminal organizations could be defeated, not through violence, but through courage, unity, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. In the end, that would be their greatest legacy. Not just defeating a cartel, but showing others how to stand against corruption and win. Emma returned home that evening, her time in hiding finally over. She hugged her mother tightly, both of them knowing that their family's sacrifice had helped make the world a little bit safer, a little more just. Dad would be so proud, Emma whispered. Emely nodded, holding her daughter close. He always said, the right thing isn't always the easy thing, but it's always worth fighting for. As night fell over Shadow Creek, the town settled into its new normal. The cartel was gone, the corruption exposed, and the community stronger than ever. Emely Connor had proven that one person's courage could inspire an entire town to stand up against evil, and that truth, when brought to light, could overcome even the darkest corruption. The story of Shadow Creek would be told for generations. Not just as a tale of victory over a cartel, but as a testament to the power of ordinary people standing together for what's right. The single mother they had underestimated had not only protected her ranch, but had helped create a blueprint for communities everywhere to fight back against corruption and win. In the end, Emely's greatest victory wasn't in defeating the cartel. It was in showing that true strength comes not from violence or intimidation, but from courage, unity, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. Shadow Creek had become more than just a town. It was now a symbol of hope for communities everywhere facing similar battles. As the stars came out over Arizona, Emely Connor sat on her porch, her daughter safe beside her, her community healing around her, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that allow people to live their lives in peace, free from fear and corruption. The cartel had thought they were targeting a vulnerable single mother. Instead, they had awakened a force for justice that would inspire generations to come. The legend of Shadow Creek would grow, but Emely was content knowing the real victory was in the quiet moments, in children playing freely again, in neighbors helping neighbors, in truth triumphing over corruption. The single mother they had underestimated had not only protected her home, but had helped create a future where communities everywhere would know they had the power to stand up against evil and win. And so ended the story of how one woman's courage inspired a town to stand up against corruption, and how the truth, when wielded with determination and unity, could bring down even the most powerful criminal empire. Shadow Creek would never forget, and neither would the world. As you've just witnessed one of the most remarkable takedowns in the fight against corruption, we'd like to take a moment to invite you to be part of our storytelling community. If this tale of courage, strategic brilliance, and unwavering determination moved you, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Tomorrow, we have another extraordinary story waiting for you, one that will show you once again how underestimating someone's strength can lead to the most unexpected consequences. Don't miss it. Hit that subscribe button now and join us for more incredible true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thank you for being part of our journey in sharing these remarkable tales of human courage and resilience. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to bring you more stories that will inspire, amaze, and remind us all of the power of standing up for what's right. Until tomorrow, remember that sometimes the most formidable strength lies in the most unexpected places.